Alrighty, behind the scenes on 38 Studios. I think it's about time we get there, don't you? What's the mic? Alrighty, welcome into My State of Mind. I am Dan Yorke. It is Friday. We are recording this program yesterday afternoon. For those of you who watch the show on Friday nights, you know that we do that. We skip our rundown, and what we do is just kind of have a long-form conversation with somebody who is compelling, interesting, important, funny, all those things. And I think I probably have it all with our former state representative and minority leader, Mr. Robert Watson, who had like a Karnak moment back in May of 2010 on the 38 Studios thing. And I think once we get rolling in this conversation, you won't want to go anywhere. At least that is my hope. Have you recovered from the Patriots game last night? See, I'm actually recording this on Thursday, so I don't know what happened, but my guess is
great win.
My guess is, yeah, great win. Let me take a look at a couple of headlines that have been running in the news cycle lately regarding 38 Studios. Here was the first in recent history, within the last few weeks, where Tim White and Ted Nesi broke the story that Gordon Fox actually had more to do with the genesis of the 38 Studios deal than he wants to admit. Okay, that was story one. And then story two, after the pressure with good government groups and the like, I don't know that Judge Silverstein, who's presiding over the civil litigation on 38 Studios, was affected by the pressure, but he came to the idea that, you know what, all the documents in the 38 Studios deal need to be released. And then a burp in that just a couple of days ago when the judge said, you know what, maybe some of those documents will stay confidential, and I'm going to meet with the lawyers next week to try to identify what those issues are. So that's kind of where we are. Mr. Watson, good to see you.
Great to be here.
Former minority leader, the guy who had, I don't know, inside information or a premonition? Which combination of both?
Been around long enough to see a bad deal when it comes along. Right. And that one stank from the beginning.
I want you folks to know how much of a premonition he had about it, because we're going to play Bob's speech on the floor, which is historic now. But you know what, Jess, what's probably a good idea for us is to actually run the Target 12 piece that kind of identifies where we are with its document drop right now. I'm sure Bob's got some questions about it since he's followed this story, like many of us, very closely.
Late Tuesday, Superior Court Judge Michael Silverstein issued an order in the 38 Studios case, asking anyone who wants to keep materials sealed in the case to put in a request with the court Monday. The judge will then hold a hearing the next day before deciding what materials he will keep withheld. Late last month, Silverstein ordered all 38 Studios material filed in the case to be released to the public. A Providence court clerk told Target 12 on Tuesday those documents would likely be unsealed next week, but that was before the judge's order. A court official now says they could release a substantial amount of material in the 38 Studios case next week, except for items that have been asked to be sealed. Those items will remain under wraps until the judge makes a decision, according to the order. A court clerk tells Target 12 they are waiting for attorneys in the case to send them over depositions from key players in the case. If that is delayed because of the order, it may push the release timeline back.
Yeah, you know, it's funny as I watch that. Well, do you have a reaction to that off the top?
Let it all out. I see no reason to keep anything confidential or under wraps. It's been a lot of years, and I think the public has a right to know what truly did happen.
You know what's amazing to me? I started the show without explaining what 38 Studios is. We run these news stories now, and we just go right into 38 Studios. There's hardly a Rhode Island resident who doesn't have at least a little bit of understanding about what 38 Studios is. This has become, well, you fill in the blank. What has 38 Studios become in the state of Rhode Island?
A perfect example of when you have government try to do business activity. When government players start to play in what should be more of a private sandbox, you end up with this sort of problems. You're going to have mismanagement. You're going to have shoddy decision making, because part-time legislators, they're not the people to make those sort of decisions. And apparently at that point in time, that was, in fact, what was happening.
Well, we should, just in case somebody's been living under a rock, we should probably tell you that 38 Studios, if you don't know, is the project that former Red Sox pitcher Curt Schilling brought to Rhode Island after being turned down in Massachusetts. And he was able to get, at least in concept, a $75 million loan guarantee from the state of Rhode Island to begin his project. He actually only, on the financial end, was destined for about $48 million of it because there was so much principal and interest to be paying back the principal and interest. I mean, it's like buying a house, borrowing for $200,000, but borrowing $250,000, so you can use the $50,000 to help pay the interest and principal on the first $200,000. That's really how they designed the deal in a lot of ways.
It was a poor idea from the get-go. Now, the question remains, who started what and when? And I noticed your headlines earlier, there's now discussion as to whether or not Speaker Fox, then Majority Leader or Speaker at the time, remains to be seen, but how close was he to the action and how soon? And that'll be interesting to see. But I think at the end of the day, the public has the right to know what happened. They're spending a lot of money on it. It's going to continue to affect the budgets that are crafted over the next dozen years, I would imagine.
The current situation, so you understand, is that 38 Studios is now the subject of civil litigation. And civil litigation...
So what?
What it's important for people to know what's going on. What's not going on is any kind of vibrant criminal investigation. Yeah. There is no General Assembly review or hearings policing itself anymore. But the civil litigation is what is now the attention drawer here, and that is where all the documents and depositions are. And it started under Governor Chafee to see if there could be some money saved from the $100 million worth of hurt that the state has. What do you think about the civil litigation in its total context? Do you think it's been worthwhile? There's been a million, couple million, 10 million saved, but not the kind of money that we're looking for.
Well, again, it depends. What does the public have the right to see? What can they scrutinize? What do they have the right to know? And if the documents that are presented, if
I think they have the right to know through hearings, public hearings, and you know, not depositions in a back room somewhere. I think they have the right to know just like Washington has hearings on scandal. We should have a hearing on this scandal.
Dan, put it this way: I'm very curious to know what they've been up to because to date, I've yet to have been spoken to.
Okay, all right. I can't stand it anymore. We're going to take a break. I want you to see a little bit of a snippet here going into the break of that famous night where the vote took place, and then you'll see the stomping speech, and then you'll tie it all together. Stay with us.
I mean, this is possibly the scariest vote you can cast because a decade from now, this could be a scandal all over the Providence Journal, and you guys started it. You approved it.
So we're talking about the 38 Studios situation, which is heating up sort of, you know, in the civil litigation, and there's going to be a document drop of some kind soon where reporters will be telling you what they've learned about who's saying what, about who did what, when, what, and how in this $75 million principal deal that now costs us $100 million because it defaulted and all of that. There was a fateful night, and I talk about this with the radio audience all the time as well on WPRO weekdays noon to 3, about there was a night, the General Assembly approved a $125 million loan guarantee. 2 years prior, bills had come up for $50 million loan guarantees, and they had failed. And so on this third attempt, it became $125 million. And a loan guarantee, for lack of a better term, is like a cosign. I'm buying a car, but I got bad credit. Can you cosign?
2 months prior, you mean? It was earlier in the year they actually pursued a $50 million
and it didn't fly.
Program. It didn't make it through. No.
Right. And so all of a sudden, 2 months later, it's not 50, it's $125 million.
It is. And
there was no discussion on the General Assembly floor about a specific project that supported this new ask, correct?
Not that I was being privy to.
There were efforts on the floor by one fellow Republican at least to limit the amount of money to $5 or $10 million
Representative Larry Earhart, who represented North Kingstown at the time, and he had a bill to cap any program at $5 million. That would have saved the state an awful lot of money.
He got walked
Keith
off.
Stokes walked
right?
him off the floor and begged him off that bill.
The executive
and when
director,
you consider,
we got to remember, people don't remember who the names are.
then
Keith Stokes,
executive director of Economic Development Corporation,
Who's been
an
sued.
appointee of then Republican Governor Donald Carcieri, and lest we forget, there was some sharp elbows at the end of Governor Carcieri's tenure in office between myself, my office, and his office. It had a lot to do with budgets being put in at the time that included fee and tax increases, if you recall.
Right.
When a certain employee was trying to land a job with the legislature, when you had situations where deep water was suddenly a boat afloat for no good reason. I mean, it was coming in at an economic cost almost double what we pay as it is. When you looked at 38
Deep water's
studios,
the windmills, by the way, in case you're.
when you look at 38 studios, there were a number of things going on that were really more or less anti-Republican type of initiatives.
So you and he weren't getting along too well, which is evident by here's Bob's famous speech. I mean, and if you remember now, there's a $125 million loan guarantee up. There's a $75 million deal in the hopper that the EDC is aware of, the Economic Development Corporation is aware of, but the General Assembly members were not. Watch this. Little technical problem. It just stuck. Sometimes that happens. It's got to be Capitol Television. Let's try it again.
Is it unprecedented to think that an elected governor should sign us on and bind us to contracts at some $120 million? Is it unprecedented to suggest that we shouldn't leave it to unelected people appointed that we may someday sue? Because surprise, surprise, it's a governor. The buck stops on the governor's desk. Unless we forget, every time I read about scandal throughout this country, anytime growing up I read about scandal in government, you know where it is? Scandal finds money. Scandal finds a pool of $125 million with sketchy strings attached. Scandal will find this bill someday, and your vote will aid and abet it. I am voting against this. You know what I found out, Mr. Speaker, today when I asked members of my Chamber of Commerce in East Greenwich? I challenge EDC, if they're here looking for their money, I challenge them. Defy me and prove me wrong. When Stanley Works withdrew half of their employees from their East Greenwich facility, not a single person from EDC ventured down to East Greenwich to try to protect those jobs. Not a single person from EDC did that. So I have no interest in giving EDC the chance to create a scandal to the tune of $125 million. Don't make a mistake. We're not creating jobs on this floor. Far from it. This budget and the budget in 2010 and 2011 are killing more jobs than you can imagine. EDC, it's a joke, Mr. Speaker.
All right. I think it's one of the most serendipitous prognostications in the history of legislative government, period. Cough it up, man. What did you know? Or were you just Karnak?
Again, maybe it's being a lifelong Rhode Islander. Maybe it's being a student of politics and understanding what I said on that speech is true today. Scandal has a habit of finding money. And when you put a pool of $125 million on the table and suggest that we pass it into law and then see what happens with it, we shouldn't be surprised when we find out a lot of bad stuff happened.
Yeah, but here's the thing. They didn't say, let's loan guarantee $125 million. Let's go out to market and sell bonds for $125 million, and we'll see if we can generate some business. They had one in the hopper, and your speech was so on the money. Did you know they had 38 studios in the hopper?
I was aware that 38 studios at the time. I was aware that they were trying to land. There was discussion.
But there was no connection to this loan guarantee ever discussed.
To the extent that this was specifically earmarked for 38
Right.
Studios, that was not information being shared if it was known
But
by
you look
anybody.
like you know. You look like you know.
There were a number of times that I had an opportunity to see a bill the way it was and vote correctly, and that's just one of them.
Lucky guess, lucky instinct, unlucky for Rhode Island.
Yeah.
You're the only one who voted no on something that everybody thought, yeah, we were in the middle of this recession, we got to find a way to carve some stuff out. You agree with me, I'm guessing, that the EDC, it's clear, if you follow the fact pattern, at least to the level we know, the EDC had this Curt Schilling deal in the hopper. It's who began it from its genesis and why?
Yes. Who is the
Was it
midwife?
just for economic development, or was it for the opportunity to line pockets? What do you think?
Well, in Rhode Island, again, the rumors are always that it's the lining of the pockets that discourages business opportunity here in Rhode Island. And when you consider, was it a governor's legacy that he was trying to achieve? And was it Don Carcieri who brought...
This was not Don Carcieri's legacy.
The legislature?
He wanted the windmills, the wind farm. He wanted Deepwater.
Absolutely.
I thought he got a kick out of Curt Schilling when he met Curt Schilling at a social event that I think he was set up on a quasi-blind political date for. I think he was so exhausted that he would like to put a signature on some economic thing. But this wasn't Don Carcieri's legacy idea.
And that may be the rabbit hole that is these documents that get revealed or get released in the coming weeks.
We find out who.
We may get a paper trail to find out exactly who knew what when and for what purposes.
Does your instinct tell you that Gordon Fox, his tax credit broker buddy, Bill Murphy, the former speaker, et al., are the real genesis of this, and that they literally hoodwinked the General Assembly that night, the House of Representatives that night, to vote for this plan? Well, but Murphy was out.
Bill Murphy
was out.
was no longer speaker.
But he helped
Gordon Fox would have been speaker at the time,
right.
and
Correct.
Now Speaker Mattiello was then Majority Leader Mattiello.
Steve Constantino is the only guy that obviously seemingly knew that this 38 Studios thing was in the hopper. He's now the secretary of something or other in Vermont.
And the whip
and the
that
other
would have
guy's in
rounded
jail.
up the votes is
the Attorney General.
So, you know,
Don't be coy with me. Tell me what you think.
The play is
Don't be
too
coy.
far.
Tell me what you think.
Well, I think a lot of people were looking to make a big splash. I think when people run for office and they promise jobs, they promise to do something to spur the economy, to create business opportunity, to allow chances for parents to raise kids and send them to college and have them come home and get decent jobs in the state of Rhode Island. When you have a gentleman like Curt Schilling show up and suggest that he may be able to create a microeconomy of gaming here in the state of Rhode Island, it can be an attractive nuisance for an awful lot of people that are less skilled in trying to find ways of saving money in government and trying to reduce the cost of spending money. You know, Republicans are always trying to cut the cost of government. Democrats can't do that. They can't shut off the gravy train. So they need to keep the faucet running. So how do they find a way to keep the programs continuing? Through these sort of opportunities. And I don't think that you'll ever elect the type of, the caliber of legislator that'll ever be able to take on a project like this and do it properly.
All right, some final thoughts on this. It's going to heat up when the documents come out. Some projections. He was good in May of 2010. Let's see what he predicts now. Stay with us. When I talk about predictions, I'm talking about that speech that Bob Watson made in the spring of 2010 when the vote for loan guarantees that gave us 38 Studios happened. What do you think is going to happen from this civil litigation document exposure? Anything substantial? Do you think Gina Raimondo will actually make good on her campaign promise for an investigation on 38 Studios? Do you think the Speaker will disengage from his hard-headed position not to have hearings that mean anything to the public?
The jury's still out on Governor Raimondo. I do believe that good government groups, and there will be a certain amount of pressure brought to bear on closing the loopholes and solving some of the problems. If we can get to the root of it, if we can determine what exactly happened. But let's be honest, the rank and file members have a greater responsibility, and every time they cast a vote, they represent their constituents, but they're also spending government money, and they're changing policy or creating policy, and they should be well thought out. And I think a lot of frivolous votes get cast in that bill.
You know, if I was running a hearing, a legitimate hearing, not a civil litigation, but a hearing on what happened, one of the first witnesses I would call would be Bob Watson. I would run that tape and I would say, what did you know?
Yeah.
Has anybody called you?
You'd think.
Has anybody called you to say, hey, Bob, that was pretty spooky how you nailed it that night. Come on in, we need to talk to you. State police, Attorney General's office, litigants, anybody?
Just media, to be honest. I have not been a participant in the legal process.
Find that strange?
Well, to be honest with you, I think I would have been a little disappointed had I found myself drawn in more fully, because I've always understood that you do have a certain privilege on the House floor, and you're not to be questioned anywhere else regarding your comments. And whether or not I'd want to be dissected, I mean, I was up in that building for 24 years, and as you know, I did a lot of talking. I'd hate to be audited on all of it.
I think you're full of it.
Perhaps. Always a pleasure.
Are you signing off the show?
I don't know.
You're not done yet.
Oh.
I think you're full of it. I'll shake your hand any time. You miss it, by the way?
I miss the people. I met an awful lot of good people in that building. As much as I would call them knuckleheads and all the things that, you know, what Donald Trump calls his
You're not with
opponents.
Trump, are you, by the way?
I like him. And I understand why he's catching fire.
He's a loose cannon. He'll start World War III. He's not presidential timber. You can't be talking about Carly Fiorina's face.
Is Hillary?
You can't be, huh?
Is Hillary?
Much more so, absolutely.
I understand what Hillary's
question.
doing, by the way. Hillary's problem is she set up that server because she was working sidebar with Bill with the Clinton Foundation, and they were cross-pollinating both Secretary of State activity and Clinton Foundation, and they didn't want that to surface. And but for 4 dead bodies in Benghazi, that never would have been found out.
You happy you got that in?
Yes.
You wanted.
I'm very happy I
You
got
wanted
that
to get that in.
Yes, I did.
All right. Once the documents are released and this thing becomes maybe more clear, come on back. We'll talk about it. Right?
I would love to.
And Bob will be on the radio soon. He loves talking politics. What did he know? I didn't get it from him. I failed. We'll wrap up. Stay with us. I'll drag it out of Watson next week on the radio. I'll get him in. I'm not done. Seriously. But we'll drag some information out of the 38 Studios investigation, hopefully, when those documents are released. The journalists will be digging, unless the judge protects the stuff that we need to see, and then we're right back at square one. Guess what? Monday, the firefighters in Providence have won a major victory. The judge said today that they'll go to arbitration on this platoon change that Mayor Elorza has demanded. Score one for the firefighters. The president of the union will be here Monday night. You have a great weekend.